Morning, everyone. Michael Fox here. I think maybe you can see me via the webcam as well. Welcome to today's webinar, which is titled Using Workflows in CCH Central to Manage Team Tasks Remotely. I'm joined by my colleague Nick, who's going to be sharing his screen and taking us through a few slides and then through some practical demonstrations as well. We've got some polls during today's webinar, which we'd like you to answer. Really simple, kind of multiple choice questions. I'm sure you're all pretty used to doing quizzes at the moment, wherever you are, on Zoom or otherwise. So they're just to kind of give us and yourselves kind of some feedback as to where you sit in kind of using workflow. But there's also the option to ask us any questions that you want, and there's also a chat box. So if you want to put anything in either of those, I'll be monitoring those as we go through, and there'll be an opportunity where I'll then ask the questions to Nick, and we'll be able to see what the answers are. Nick, are you there?
Hi, yes, I am here, mate. Sorry, I was on mute.
Hi, Nick. Yeah, no worries, no worries. Me and Nick have both been in lockdown that long that we've had to have coronavirus style haircuts. My girlfriend's done mine, and it's okay. It looks pretty similar to how I'm looking on the screen there. Nick, a little less so. You've gone the whole hog.
Yeah, mine is. Mine was a little less skilled with the clippers, so I just decided to go straight over the top and decided it will grow back in the short term. So yeah, I'm a little less designer than yours.
Sure, designer. Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, a bit of background from me, if I haven't met you already. I'm the account manager for the north of England, so from Manchester up to Scotland. I've worked in the accountancy software industry for over 7 years at Iris. Specifically, my background was in hosted IT and some collaboration apps that they had as well. And then as of 5 months ago, I joined Wolters Kluwer. I'd never really looked majorly at the software, but since joining, I can see it is above and beyond better than what Iris have. Nick, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Mike. Some number of you may have met me previously in my former life as a trainer and consultant, actually coming out to you, doing training on products such as document management, workflow, accounts, tax, some areas like that. But previously to that, I worked in a firm in Bolton called Barlow Andrews. Some of you may have heard of it. They do attend the Northern User Group, and use the Central software actually in practice as well. So I've got a background of what it's actually like to use on a day-to-day basis before consulting on it. So what I'm going to show to you today in terms of how the workflow and document management side works is actually how I used to use it in practice myself. Obviously, the way in which I'm going to show you today is just one example of how you can use it, but really it's a real-life example of how a firm would use the workflow system in their actual practice.
Okay, great stuff, Nick. I'll kind of leave it over to you if you want to get me into to ask any of the poll questions when you need.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're going to look at sharing today for you is we're going to show you how to implement workflows in your practice in terms of how you would go about setting them up, the background knowledge that you need to know before you actually go about implementing them, mainly around sorting out the flow of what your actual practice processes are and how you go about planning them out before putting them into CCH. And then some hits and tips to get the most out of workflow, understanding the different routes and pathways that workflows can go down, also some automation facilities in there, but then also some of the really complicated areas such as the advanced workflow designer that I'm sure some of you may have heard of in previous demonstrations or in the user guides that we send out to you, but just a bit of an explanation as to what the possibilities are in there. And then the final element is integrating workflow with the CCH document management system. So I believe a number of you on the call may already be using document management in CCH, but even for the people who haven't got it, just to see what that product also does in the database that connects not only the workflow system, but the rest of your compliance tools that you're already probably using with us, just to see the benefits that having an integrated document management system connected to those compliance products that you're already using alongside workflows for approving documents as well, such as engagement letters. Okay. So as I mentioned before, the first thing we're going to look at is how to implement workflows in your practice. But I believe Mike has got a poll to ask you first. If that's all right with you, Mike.
So this will be coming up on screen now. So the question is, Are you using workflow in any capacity at the moment? We don't have the countdown music, but if I give you kind of 10 seconds to click there to answer those, and then this will give us an idea of how many people are using this at the moment. Because it's something that's free in your system, it's very difficult for us to tell if you've kind of started engaging with it. It's not kind of a product line, it's just part of Central. So thank you for that. That's most people answering, so I'll press stop there. So we had 56% said yes and 44% said no. So that's quite interesting to know, and that will, I imagine, help us kind of pitch what we're going to show you today through Nick. If you want to ask any questions, as I said, you can put those in the question box, and I can answer them if I know them, or we'll be putting those to Nick as well.
Absolutely, thanks, Mike. Yeah, that is really interesting to see that effectively half of the people on the call are using the workflow product and half aren't. So even though it's free in the software, a number of you haven't given it a go yet, probably because you're not used to seeing how the process works or what the possibilities are in the system. So as Mike mentioned before, it's free. There's no harm in giving it a go. Giving it a try. We also do have consultancy on it as well if you have tried and thought that you might need a bit of a helping hand towards it, but there's absolutely no problem with giving it a go yourself beforehand. So just to show you one example of how a workflow can be used around your compliance area is if I go to one of my home pages, I've got a workflow homepage, and this is centered around the reviewers view of CCH. So actually I'd say one of the managers or partners checking what all the jobs are up to. I've got two workflows set up there. The top one is my personal tax workflow, and the one at the bottom is accounts production. Now, my personal tax workflow I've got there has 6 milestones, these headers across the top here. Now, what's important to know is that these milestones can be completely redesigned and added in extra milestones for your practice. So this is just the example that I used before that my previous firm used, such as information requested, has data been received, have we completed data entry, have we has the return been reviewed, has the return gone to HMRC, and then we can complete the year. Now, if you wanted an extra step in there, there's absolutely no harm in doing that. Okay. Now, what's also important to know is that this is not just a linear process. It doesn't just go from left to right. It has routes and processes built into it that I had to use more often than not in practice myself, where I would complete that data entry for a personal tax return. It would then go to a review stage for the partner, and then again, more often than not, it would come back to complete data entry because I might have made some errors or it needs to go for some amendments, and it might then go back to return reviewed. There might then be some information that was missing from the information that was sent from the client, which it can then go right the way back to information requested. Now, this is where, when you're designing your workflows, it's really important to plan out all the different possibilities that a personal tax return in this circumstance can go down in terms of the flow of work. What you don't want to do is just build a very, very simple structure that goes information requested, data received, complete data entry, return reviewed, all the way down to the end. Because then what happens is a tax return might be completed where it goes to return reviewed, and then in that circumstance that I've just said there, where it needs to have some amendments made to it, if you've not built in the possibility for it to go back a step, that return then gets effectively stuck in that workflow. So it's about building in terms of just a very simple flow chart that you write down on paper and say, this is all the possibilities that a process has to follow before getting to its end. That's how you would then go about building your workflow in the system. And it's very similar to what I've got at the bottom in terms of my accounts production one, where I've got requesting information, importing from Twinfield, which is our own integrated cloud bookkeeping system, through to draft accounts prepared, reviewed, final accounts signed, update tax, and file accounts. Now, that will have in there lots of different routes of which you can go down. Now, these views that I've got here aren't just ticks and cogs to show that each step has been completed. If I right click on this one here, I can have it showing the date of which each step was completed. So rather than having an Excel spreadsheet that you might use at the minute if you're not using workflow, what the system can do is it can date stamp each time a step was completed. And it's not just a date stamp, it also shows who completed that step of the workflow. So a full audit trail to show who is doing the steps of a particular job, whether it be a personal tax, accounts production, or anything else in your system that you want to build a process for. Now, to give you an example of how it's not just a linear process, if I go into my maintenance area of workflow, this is where you would actually go to build your internal workflows. You go to File, Maintenance, Central Workflow, and Standard Workflows. If I then choose my CCH personal tax return status one in here, this is a bit more detailed than the one I just showed you. But the important thing to know here is the next step column, the one I've just highlighted there on the right hand side. What's important to know here is that each step has either one option to go down in terms of request data can only then go to data received, and then that option has got the answers to 6, 4, or 5. So when the data's been received, it can either go back to reminder for information, it can then go to further information requested, or if it's all been received, the next step can go to return in progress. And this is where the end user has the option to choose which of those answers is relevant for that particular step. So it's a full flow of work process, hence why it's called workflow, to get you to the end of that particular cycle. It's also got reminders in there as well to make sure that you don't miss potential deadlines. Obviously, that's a lot easier to regulate with personal tax because you've only got one deadline in terms of the 31st of January to hit. Whereas the accounts production one is a lot more difficult for you to manage because it's always a moving timeline month by month. Whereas what the system can do is notify you if it believes a workflow is not going to hit its deadline. For example, if you've not requested information from the client a month before its filing deadline, the system can notify you using a KPI monitoring tool that we've got to tell you that the workflow may not be completed. So it's really important to make sure that you build the flow of the work into the workflow system correctly for your practice, and that I would say is possibly the most difficult part if you're trying to do it yourself without using the user guides or the online YouTube videos that we've got for workflow. So please do have a look at those if you're going to give it a go yourself. And then if you're still struggling with that a little bit, because it's not going to be the easiest thing for you if you've never used workflow before, you might be worthwhile getting one of our consultants to phone you maybe for half a day to get you set up on that. Okay. There are also tools in here that is really useful where it can notify the member of staff once a task has been assigned to them. So yeah, please do be aware that there are some notify tools in the workflow section as well. Okay. So in terms of setting up workflows, it's all in this standard designer for workflow as well. Okay, so you would go to File, Maintenance, Central Workflow, and Standard Workflows, and pick the ones you've got in there. Now, if I come back to Standard Workflows, all the ones with CCH before their name on the left-hand side should be in your central system already. So you've got a template to work from at this point on. Okay. Now you can see at the bottom there I've designed quite a few others in my professional services days going out doing training for you, but you should have a template there for each of the processes which you want to use at that particular time. Okay, so after that step there, I'm just going to pass back to Mike to ask the next question before we go into hints and tips to get the most out of workflow.
Yeah, so this one, a simple yes or no question. So do you find that you lose track of compliance or non-compliance jobs at the moment? So far we've only seen I suppose what we call a compliance job, personal tax, accounts production, those sorts of things. But do you ever lose track also of non-compliance jobs? So that might be engagement letters or kind of things that sit outside of the software. So I'm just going to give you a couple more seconds to vote on that one. And then we will close the poll. Okay, so answer on that one, much more clear cut. 71% of you said yes, you do find that you lose track. So perhaps that's why you've joined today, but that's much more interesting to see. Probably quite comforting to all of you to know that you're 71% of you are in the same boat there, and 29% obviously said no.
Yeah, that's quite a high number. That like 71% saying they do lose track of them. I'm going to focus, I believe, on the non-compliance area at this point, looking at how you can integrate workflow with the document management system to keep track of the non-compliance process as well as looking at maybe a client take-on area. So if I drop back into Central here, one of the workflows which we look at in terms of when you admit a new client into the system is the CCH client take-on one. And what this does is it allows you to keep track of making sure that you've filled in all your internal processes when putting a client into the CCH system, such as the system can automatically send a client welcome email with information requests using this workflow. It can then check that you've received that information that you've asked for. Have you completed the anti-money laundering checks? Again, it's nice to have that information saved in the system that you've got proof that someone has completed that step. As I mentioned before, there's a full audit trail to make sure who completed each step in the process, so you've got that there. It can check the contact types correct, whether it's a limited company or sole trader. Again, checking that you've added all the relative directors and other associations in the system. And then also a bit further down, adding the correct assignments and jobs so people can build the right time against it. And having this client take on workflow can just make sure that you're getting the client into the system correctly. All the information on your new client form that I expect you probably have at your practice is all filled in the system correctly. And again, you can tailor this to your particular practice if you've got any additional steps in there as well. Now, one of the ones which I'm going to show you next is around the document side. So if I look at my document approval workflow that I've got here, it's a very, very simple one, but it's relating to whenever you send a document out, whether it be an engagement letter, a general correspondence letter, you might have an internal process that a particular letter goes through a review stage, either via manager or a partner, depending on the size of your practice. So you can see what I've got there in terms of, it's only 4 steps, really dead easy workflow to implement, where it has a review, a redraft, PDF, and lock document option. So whenever you create a letter in the system, it will always start it up as if it's a Word document, which gives obviously the ability for people to edit that and make the changes that they need to before it's then saved into the system. Now, based on this workflow, if I was to create a general correspondence letter from document management, which I'll show you later on, what the system will do is then ask me, does this need to go for a review, yes or no? Now that option can be set purely for partners. So the partners don't have to set it for review to themselves, obviously, but more junior members of staff could be forced for it to go through a review process before it's able to be sent out to the client. So again, having that internal process that keeps track of that internal process for your clients documents, not only from the compliance side but non-compliant side. But the important one we've got here is that you can automatically PDF that Word document and save it in the document management system at the same time. So rather than having to do it manually that you might do at the minute using our PDF collection option in the document management system, the system can do that as well at the same time and then lock it in the system so people can't make any changes. So when someone's reviewed it and said, yes, that's great, that's ready to go out to the client, for example, I think the lock on that document so no one can make any changes to it at that point in time. If at a later date people need to review that engagement letter and change it, they would have to create a new engagement letter and get that signed by the client rather than editing the existing one, just from an audit trail point of view. Okay, now we'll go through this workflow towards the end of the demonstration today and show you how easy it is to attach this to specific documents. But from a non-compliant side, it's all about utilizing this homepage that I mentioned here, especially around your non-compliance information, just to check that all your processes have been made to that particular deadline. As you can see, each of these have got a deadline date relating to it, and the accounts production one is here. It's all about using these filters. So if I say show me all the accounts jobs with a deadline date relating to September 2020 in this circumstance. Obviously for you, I'd expect you to be looking at your April 2021s in a realistic time point for yourselves. But if I choose September 2020 and hit apply, it will show me all my accounts jobs that have a deadline date of the end of September. And it tells you where they're up to in the process. It will also tell you who's managing that process. So if I come across to my show employee, it says who's got that step, so I'm owning it. It's got to me to complete that particular step, so you can then do a chaser. What you're also able to do is you're able to export this to Excel as well. So you've probably seen this in lots of other areas of CCH where there's an export to Excel button in the ribbon bar at the top. On workflow, it's down here. So if I was to click Excel and click export with employees, this would give you just a snapshot of data of which you could then send out around your practice to say, this is where all the personal tax jobs are up to at the minute, this is who's owning them, rather than the minute, if you're not using workflow, you probably have to, you probably produce something very similar to this at the minute in Excel. What this can do is keep track of it using your CCH database, but then also export it to Excel to easily share across your staff base. Okay, so if I just drop back to Mike to ask the next poll in the CCH webinar regarding integrating workflow with CCH document management.
Yeah, so this question's all around how often you need to ask a colleague. In fact, I'll launch it so you can see it. How often do you need to ask a colleague for an email that's gone to or from a client? I suppose now that we're all perhaps investigating working from home a bit more, we're going to do that a bit more. So you've got a couple of options here. Obviously, just pick the option that's closest to it. But any times that you need to ask that colleague for an email that's gone to or from, it's kind of locked, I suppose, in their inbox. So I'll give you a couple more seconds for that, and we'll close that there. So 0% said hourly. 22% of people are saying daily, 44% of people are saying weekly, and then 33% saying less than monthly. So 22% there and daily, and 44% weekly is quite interesting. I suppose that that is a lot of emails perhaps going back and forth, or a lot of times you got to pick up the phone to ask for that information. And I think we're going to obviously show you now via Nick a way you could maybe get around that.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike, on that. So I expect the 33% of people that said they don't need to ask that very often are already using our document management system that integrates with Outlook. Now, for the people who are on that 44%, potentially you are using document management to integrate with workflow and the email function, but maybe haven't got it set it up perfectly for your practice. So there's going to be some areas in here which I'm just going to recommend that you have set up for your particular client. So what I've got in my CCH database here is I've got my Outlook 2010 set up. Now, I expect you're probably using a more up-to-date version of Outlook than myself. I just need to update it in my test system, but it does work with Outlook 365 all the way through to that particular program. What we'll see is I'll get a little plugin in the bottom left-hand corner of my Outlook system. And what it does is if I select an email here, for example, this Reg Everton one, it's just still loading it through. What I get in the bottom left-hand corner is that little plugin I mentioned before, the CCH email filing plugin. And what it does is it checks that the email is coming from into the entire CCH database. So it's checking reg.sc.everton@gmail.com against the CCH database to see if that email is registered across any particular clients or contacts. And what we've got is it's matched it for 5 clients or contacts in the database. We've got Reg Everton, Harry Glass, and WK FRS 102 in terms of clients, and then 2 test contacts I've got in the system in terms of tax districts that he's registered against as well, just to show that it can be registered against contacts. Now, this email we've got across here might be relating to either his personal information or the limited company. So what you would have to do is just simply drag and drop that email across onto the relevant client in the system that it relates to if you want to file it. That's how you would file an email to make sure that it goes straight into the system. And then for anyone who said they have to ask daily to see if any correspondence has come across from the clients or your staff members, if I went to my client Reg Everton in the system, so if I'm Reg and went to his document management system, what we would see is that that email that I filed previously in a previous demonstration would sit here. You see the email there. If I was to double click on it, it would open it as an Outlook email, of which I could then reply from within the document management system. So if anyone files the email in Outlook, everyone could then see it straight away in document management. Now, the benefit of this is that there are some settings that you could have for your practice that mean any replies to that conversation are automatically filed in the CCH database. So if I click the little cogs here with tools and go to options and go to filing, the important ones here are automatically filed conversation replies on both sent and received emails. If they are ticked, if the staff member files the first email in a conversation, any replies to that email will be automatically filed in the CCH database using the same credentials that you filed the first one, whether it's going to Reg Everton or WKFRS 102. It's going to keep filing the subsequent emails under the relevant correct client. Okay, so I would suggest each of your staff members have that ticked, and it would hopefully assist in the number of in reducing the number of times people have got to search for emails that their staff have saved in the system. Now, in terms of integrating documents with workflow, if I wanted to create a letter from a template, such as a correspondence letter or an engagement letter, you would probably use in document management the create button at the top. And what I would have are lots of different templates in here in my system. Now, I've got a general correspondence letter that using my system here, hopefully you can see I've got my letterhead at the top, but then I've got some merge fields. So address 1, address 2, address 3, town, county, and postcode. These merge fields here will pull through information from the database automatically onto the letter, and it means you can just have one standard template in the background and it will pull each client's information straight onto it. So if I choose general correspondence, what we have at the bottom is the action where it can be automatically assigned to a particular workflow. Now, I've got lots of different document workflows set up for myself just for previous demonstrations or testing for previous clients. what you can have is that depending on what template is chosen, it can go down a specific workflow, because you could have a workflow for engagement letters, you could have a standard document approval workflow, and the staff member could not change that. You can have it set in the task permissions area that someone cannot change the workflow that's attached to a workflow, so to attach to the document, so it has to be attached. Now, if I click finish on that, I'll say I'll just change the file name to test document, so we can see that in there. And if I click finish, it'll now open up Word. So that's in there. Click cancel. And I'll just put test in there. You see it's brought through his address and it's gone dear reg and all that in there. So I'll close that. I'll say, yep, we can check that back in. That's great. What we get now is a little flag on the right hand side to show that a workflow is associated to that document. Now it will be assigned to someone called Cat Parkin, who I believe is the manager for this particular client, because the way I've got my workflow set up is that each document is then set to be reviewed by the manager. So if I was Cat Parkin, I would have a homepage with all my task list on it that I could then see all my accounts jobs, tax jobs and non-compliance jobs, where it'd be reviewing documents like this, of which they could then click the flag and say that I can either approve or send this document for redraft. So this is where before, when we saw, could set up the different routes that documents could go down, or it's same with the compliance jobs as well, it could have different answers to a particular step in the process. Now, if I say this needs to go for redraft, that would then go and it could be assigned to someone else depending on how you've got the workflow set up. And if I click this one now, I could then say, yeah, that has been completed. Okay, so the draft's been completed. Depending on how I've got the workflow set up, it could then automatically go down the approval process and everything like that. But you would also then have a workflow process for my document approval area that would then list who is reviewing each document, whether it be an engagement letter or general correspondence letter, whether it's gone for redraft, and then have it so it automatically updates it as a PDF and locks the document in the system ready for it to go out. And as I mentioned before, you can change what milestones you've got there at the top to whatever your practice wants to be. If you want to have 10 different steps for a particular document, that's absolutely fine, but it's important to find a fine balance where people aren't getting bogged down with too many steps that they need to complete for just a document to be saved in the system. So having that document area in the system where it automatically assigns it to a particular workflow if someone's created a document in the system is really, really important to make sure that you keep track of where all the documents are in the CCH system. So hopefully you've seen today that that you can create workflows around compliance areas with personal tax and accounts production as 2 examples. And then I've shown you 2 workflows around the document approval side and the client take on area. So it's just really important to know that you've got the area to go to file, maintenance, central workflow, and then standard workflows we've got in there to edit the ones which I've shown you there. Now, I did mention before we have an advanced workflow designer. Now, this area is a chargeable one, so not every single firm will want to go down it. But what this is able to do for you is an example that one of our larger firms are testing, where if you're using our one-click system for you to send documents out to the client for approval, is one of our large firms are integrating that with personal tax, where if a manager approves a personal tax return and saying, yep, that's ready to go out to the client, it can send a letter, a tax return letter, as well as the return out to the client for approval through one click. And if the client approves that tax return in the cloud, in their one-click system, it can bring it back to the system, mark it as approved from the client, and then automatically go and file it at HMRC for you on your behalf. So it's about automating certain processes in the system. Now, that's only available to do in the Advanced Designer rather than the standard workflow area. And there are also a couple of other features in there. So if you're interested in understanding what the Advanced Workflow Designer includes, rather than just the standard one that's included free of charge for CCH, please contact Mike or your account manager if you're not based in the north in the core team. But yeah, that's just one little area which is a bit more advanced than what is given to you free of charge in CCH. So if we just drop back into the presentation. We should have some questions that I think have come through, Mike, if you're able to go through those.
Yes, so we've got a couple of questions here on my screen. So question around, is there a limit to the number of workflows we can set up? Because I know there's those certain ones, look like there's about 10 standard ones, and you had a big list there. Is there any sort of limit?
No, so the whole idea is that you should be able to have every single one of your. Oh, do you mean? Oh, right. Okay. Do you mean? Right.
Like
So I'm just
types or
thinking through.
templates?
Right, so different templates of workflow. No, you can have as many different templates as you like. So the perfect example for that is around documents. So you might have different workflows for different document types. So as I mentioned before, you might have an engagement letter workflow that has to go through a specific process, but a general correspondence letter probably doesn't have to jump through as many hoops to get to its end process. I would suggest for your compliance workflows, you only have one workflow for each compliance work that you do, whether it be for accounts, tax, or then corporation tax. You have one workflow for each of those processes. But for your non-compliance areas, you can have as many different workflows as you like for each different letter if you wanted. You might want to streamline it and just have a couple of workflows, just so there's less maintenance internally for yourself. But for your compliance side, I recommend having one for each process specifically.
Okay. Another one, if we were going to set up a workflow, any idea? I suppose it's how long is a piece of string, how long it might take, the average practice?
Yeah, so if you were to do it yourself, obviously you need to get the online help guide that we have on the website, which I'm sure Mike or your account manager can send out to you if you can't find it. And it might take you half a day of time just to plan your route that you want to build on paper effectively, and then put it into the CCH system using the instructions that we've got. You would then have to test it a couple of times to go through all the different possibilities, because what I found when I was consulting on it is that on paper you might think, fantastic, we've got every single possibility, and then when you're going through it live in the CCH system, you go, hang on, actually when it's going through the review stage, the manager might realize that a bit more information is requested and you need to build in that extra step. So it could take anything from half a day to a couple of days to get the perfect workflow. But what I recommend you do is once you've done the flow, have a bit of time away from it, and then come back, and it'll give yourself another fresh look at it to see if you've missed anything, because otherwise you get a bit blinded by a particular process that you're thinking of, whether it be for an engagement letter, for example, and you forget about all the possibilities that engagement letter can go down. So it might be worth having a break from it, or getting another set of eyes to look at it once you've planned out that workflow.
Yeah, and I think you're right. That that real world feedback is what comes, and what kind of makes a workflow finally what it's going to be.
Yeah.
So one from Roxanne: can you run a mail merge from workflows? I think we saw there was a choice to do that.
Yeah, so if you're using a document management system, particularly if running the mail merge facility is really useful, where it can then automatically save each of those documents that you've created from that mail merge into the CCH system. And yes, a workflow can be attached to each of those particular documents. So if you're running a mail merge to 150 clients, either requesting information on a monthly basis, yeah, it can. A workflow can be assigned to each of those documents at the same time and be assigned to the right person based on how you've built the workflow, because each step would be assigned to a specific person in your business, whether it be a secretary or someone on reception, whether it's right at the start of the workflow sending information out, all the way through to a manager who might want to approve that letter before it's sent out to 150 clients in one go. So yeah, absolutely, you can use workflows alongside mail merge.
I think that goes on to the next question, actually. Can multiple individuals have responsibility for a task on a workflow? So it could it be assigned to kind of a manager, and then can you add comments when you've completed that task?
Okay, so this is one question we used to get all the time in consultancy, in terms of, can a whole group of people be assigned to a specific step in the workflow, or a couple of people? Unfortunately, one person has to be assigned to that workflow in terms of have the responsibility for that particular step. So the example for that is, you might have a group of managers that review sets of accounts. Once the draft accounts have been completed, can 3 people be set the task of reviewing those sets of accounts? Unfortunately, the way in which the workflow has been built is that a specific user has to be assigned that task. So it creates ownership of that task effectively, rather than just saying there's one in here. If one of you want to complete it, that's great. It actually assigns it to a specific person using the responsibility tab or security groups that you've got set up in CCH. So unfortunately, there's no facility to do that, to tag it to multiple people in the system.
Okay. Document creation workflow showed the creation of a PDF from a Word document. How is this done, and how does it show on the workflow?
Okay, so if I just drop back into back into my CCH system, what we've got is if I was to approve this document, so I'll come back to I can't remember which one it was it John Bain? This one here. So this general correspondence letter here, if I complete that step based on what I've got set up here, it might not work based on what my workflow is. What it does is, there you go, it's actually done it. So if I approve that document, what it's done is it's changed it from a Word document to a PDF in the background. So it's now a PDF around the Word document. If I double click on it, it's now a PDF. I think the one I used actually was a Reg Everton one, I think, not a general correspondence. Yeah, it was this test document one here. So if I just refresh that, it's now, because it's been approved, it's now turned it to a PDF and locked it. So what it does, it uses this create PDF function that we've got at the top in document management automatically in the background. So you've got full links to basically convert it automatically in the background, because people don't like sending out Word documents to clients, really. They want to send out PDFs, so they've got no ability to change it. So using that create PDF function will mitigate that issue for you.
Okay. One from Ailey. Sorry, I do remember your name. I'm just looking at how it's spelled. Ailey. Do you recommend getting support for the initial setup for workflows, or do you think that it's something that can be done internally? I think we kind of covered that, but it's
yeah.
Yeah,
I'm trying not to be too blasé about this. It depends on your internal skill set with CCH. If you're using it for a number of years, you know the navigation, you could probably give it a good go in terms of understanding who is the responsibility, who's responsible for each step. The user guides are really step by step laid out for you, so you can build it yourself if you wanted to. I would always recommend giving it a go yourself. It's free. Yeah, if you get it wrong, we can always delete it. It's not the end of the world. So I would always recommend giving it a go yourself. If you find you're struggling with it, absolutely, we can get one of the support consultants or one of the professional service consultants to give you a call and talk through that with you. But yeah, because it's free, there's nothing wrong with giving it a go. It's not like deciding to give personal tax or accounts production a go. You have to pay to use those particular products. In the CCH system, if you want to try it. Workflow is in there ready to go if you want to just give it a go yourself.
Okay, and we'll just take a couple more. Sorry, I'm struggling to see which ones we've got. There was a note about the return workflow and the pie chart, the correlation between them. Does that, I think on that pie chart, was it just complete and not with the options?
Yeah, so that pie chart there, probably should have removed that. So that pie chart is relating to our old historical workflow that we've got set up for personal tax. So if you're a long-standing user for CCH personal tax, you probably used what's known as our legacy workflow previously. So yeah, that was there for any other demonstrations I've done previously for firms that are still using the legacy one, where I'm trying to get them to move across to the new one. So yeah, that pie chart doesn't relate to the new workflow.
Right. Okay. And then there was a question about sharing the presentation, which we will be doing to everyone, and also a link to the user guide. Yeah, I'll do that. Is there a standard cost to integrate the document management system, or is it bespoke? So I think.
Yeah, so on that, if you've not using document management, you've seen some relevance in it today. I think what we can probably do for you is we'll do a more bespoke demonstration for yourself, just to show you the core functionality of it, show you how it can maybe help you practice if there are some firms that are using it on the call today. I'm sure we can get them to maybe give you a call and speak to you in terms of the benefits of it. In terms of the pricing for it, I'm sure Mike could go through that with you or your relevant account manager. But the benefit of document management is that we can set it up how your practice wants to use it. It's all relating to how documents are stored in relevant document types and using your current assignments. So it's not just a turn on and plug and play. You have to have it set up for your particular practice needs.
Okay, thanks, Nick. And then I think last question, it looks like, does everyone need to implement a workflow for a particular process, or can a subset test it without the whole department firm? I suppose you can just leave it. You can just kind of ignore it if you just want to test it.
Yeah, so you can test it on a case-by-case basis rather than doing a blanket add to every single one of your clients. You can do an ad hoc start workflow manually on a particular client or particular document. So yeah, there's no worry that you think you're going to completely change your internal practice processes and everyone's going to start being assigned tasks. You can test it on a particular client that you're aware of before admitting it to every single one of your staff.
Okay. I will leave it there then. Sorry, I can never do two things at once, just replying to someone that had a question there. Oh, one more actually, sorry, from Roxanne, as I scroll down. Can you reassign steps in the workflow to other members of staff?
Yes, particularly useful around if anyone's off sick or if anyone goes on a holiday. Yes, you can bulk reassign an entire employee's processes to other employees, or do it ad hoc manually to another one as well. So yes, you do have the ability to reassign. It's on the main task homepage in the bottom left hand corner. There's a little man's head that you can click on to reassign it to a particular employee.
Okay, that looks like everything that's come through, Nick. So thank you very much for that. Thanks everyone for joining. Looks like we've just taken kind of 41 minutes there. What's next? If you do want some support, if you're using Workflow at the moment, there was one question which I'm going to get support to get back to you, Michelle, on that, or you can visit obviously the support website, or there's the telephone number there. There's also the ability in the software, which I do find not many people, some people don't seem to know about it, where you can record what you're doing. It will record the button clicks and where you are in the software, and you can kind of send that off to support so they can see what issue it is you're having. There is training available, mylearningportal.walterskluwer.co.uk, or you can obviously contact me, my email, michael.fox@walterskluwer.co.uk, if I'm your account manager. If not, then you should know who that is. Or if you're completely new to CCH and you want to ask us any questions, then the email is on the screen there, or you can give us a call as well. But other than that, thanks very much, Nick. A recording will be sent out of this to you if you've missed any of it, or if you want to share it with any of your colleagues. And there'll also be other webinars coming up in this series as well, so keep an eye on your emails and we'll be letting you know about those. Other than that, thanks very much, everyone, and cheers for joining.
Thank you very much, guys.
Cheers now.